the CEO of one of the Chinese companies at the towards the end of this little video. Um, he says not only can they not afford to, train at the scale that we're training at in terms of data size and CPU and GPU, but it's not even necessary anymore because they've figured out how to do it
Yeah.
without it, right? So they've been pushed into this corner and they got out of it.
Yeah.
So, which is incredible because, these are long poles in the tent of getting into this game. And if
Oh
they
yeah.
did it without, the massive cost,
Yeah.
then that opens the door for a lot of other innovators to get into this game. And that
Oh yeah.
really could destabilize in a good way the Mag 7. Welcome to Practical AI, everybody. My name is Jeff Northrup. I'm here with Peter Lynn. This is our second season of Practical AI. I always recommend people double the speed because Peter and I talk kind of slowly. We are sponsored by Pocket AI. Pocket AI is a tool that you can use to edit the weights of your models. You can prune over 60% of the weights of your models without decreasing the accuracy. And I will say one other thing. You can find us on Spotify and listen to us in podcast form. Peter, there's an interesting video that came out, or YouTube that came out from Eric Schmidt, and I believe he's former Google
Google.
CEO.
Yep. Mhm.
And I'll just bring it up here. So, and we'll drop this in the comments. But he covers a lot of ground, and there's a lot of interesting topics that spin out of this. But essentially, China's not only caught up, but
Yeah.
maybe has passed us already, or the US, in terms of innovation with AI. So tell us a little bit, just kind of your thoughts on this topic and this conversation.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, let's say about 4 years ago, the U.S. started to put sanctions in. Actually, before that, probably 8 years, started to put sanctions in to limit China's ability to get the fastest GPUs, right? And not only that is they told TSMC, hey, you can't manufacture CPUs and GPUs with the most advanced processes, so like the 7 nanometer and smaller. Well, so that means that anyone else has to basically find another way to train models because they just don't have access to the best hardware. Well, long story short, China was forced to find a better way, and they did.
Okay, so how much of this is just, necessity is the mother of all invention versus, and basically we boxed ourselves into this corner by forcing them to be constrained. They
Yep.
had to get their way out. Um, versus just the natural rise of the ebb and flow of
Right.
where the information is and who's innovating properly anyway. How much of this is sort of a self-inflicted own goal versus yeah, they probably would have gotten there anyway.
I would say that if the sanctions weren't there, it probably would have slowed down the options for competing countries or competing companies because if you have access to H100s or you have access to the best GPUs, then you don't need to find another way of doing things that's cheaper, faster, smaller data, right? Because if we go back to when Google first published the Transformer paper, Google could have done what OpenAI did, which is just scale the thing up more and more and more, but they didn't. They scaled it a little bit and then they stopped. Whereas OpenAI is the one that went and said, okay, well, let's take Transformers and let's just scale this stuff up and let's see what happens. Let's see if it gets better if we scale it 10 times bigger every time. And that's where they came up with the scaling law, right? So OpenAI actually created this mentality of if we just keep scaling language models, LLMs, bigger, 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 and we pump more hardware, more money, more electricity, more GPUs at it, this will get us to the right place. And so the focus has been for the last 4 to 6 years, just building bigger and bigger things using the same exact architecture. Other people that don't have access to the hardware say, well, we don't have that hardware, so we can't do OpenAI scaling approach. So they found a different way.
I just looked, the Science and Chips Act was signed into law in 2022, which I think really encourages a lot of funding towards the domestic side in the
Yeah.
US of the chip manufacturing. But we know that a lot of the Trump tariffs were started in 2016 and continued under the Biden administration. Will probably be continued again under the new Trump administration. That, is kind of maybe putting pressure on the flow of innovation, essentially. But
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about China's approach here because I wouldn't have expected that China would have kind of gone with an open source approach to this, But this model, which by performance is only a year behind where we are today in the US, as I understand it, it's open source, right?
Yep. Yeah, so they haven't released the full model yet, so I don't know the details. But from what they're reporting, they had access to only old GPUs, and they don't have access to the massive amounts of memory that OpenAI has, right? Because OpenAI has this contract with Microsoft where they get $10 billion worth of compute credits, right? Most companies don't have $10 billion compute budget.
Yeah.
So that means like, so they're saying they train on the scale of $10 million for a training run, not $100 to $500 million for a training run.
Yeah, again, this is a 10-minute video. I encourage everyone to watch it because it's impressive. But the CEO of one of the Chinese companies at the towards the end of this little video, um, he says not only can they not afford to, train at the scale that we're training at in terms of data size and CPU and GPU, but it's not even necessary anymore because they've figured out how to do it
Yeah,
without it, right? So they've been pushed into this corner and they got out of it.
yeah,
So, which is incredible because, these are long poles in the tent of getting into this game. And if
oh
they
yeah,
did it without, the massive cost,
yeah,
then that opens the door for a lot of other innovators to get into this game. And that
oh yeah.
really could destabilize in a good way the Mag 7.
Yeah, I mean, I would predict that companies in France, Germany, and the EU, and smaller startups in the US outside of Silicon Valley will probably adopt these techniques and then overtake the three, four big guys because the big guys have gotten in this mindset of like, we'll just keep scaling stuff up, and we just keep throwing more hardware at it, and we keep doing the same thing because that's our advantage, right? So they basically got tunnel vision into like, this is the way to do it. We have the advantage. And not only that, Sam Altman has gone around telling VCs, if you fund us, you have to agree to not fund any of the startups. So it's completely predatory and evil.
Yeah, yeah, I think you know that. All right, so again, this 10-minute video has a lot in it, but we get basically at the end of the video towards this sort of philosophical conundrum, and that is, okay, if the Chinese or any state actor can flip to open source,
Yep.
we have possibly another problem. And then if we just kind of go back, 80 years and say, what would have happened if we had open sourced the Manhattan Project and every country on the planet had nuclear weapons right now? Would it be long before one of them just decided to just, blow up the world? And I think that's the concern here with AI, and that is, should this have state level controls on it? Should this be regulated so that only AWS, Anthropic and OpenAI survive, and that they're heavily regulated? And so that's kind of the debate. But while that debate is happening, China goes off and just open sources it, and now theoretically, any
Yep.
nation can take this, pathway and just say, fine, we're just going to use this template. And we're going to build out our own AI and get to drones and,
Yep.
wherever they want to go, right? Crime, whatever. So where do you think this ends up? Does open source win and this becomes like mutually assured destruction, or is
No.
it
So
get regulated?
yeah, I think those in power have always used this fear tactic of mutually assured destruction as the right approach because their interest is in maintaining power, not democratizing power. So if we look at open source, before open source, IBM basically ruled the enterprise software space. They basically ruled pretty much the whole entire space of like how do you do computers from like 1940s all the way to 1970s, 80s. They were the place. And like there's a common saying, like you won't get fired for using IBM. Used to be the old saying,
Mhm. Yep.
right? When you and I started, that was a common saying, like go with IBM Oracle, you're safe, you won't get fired. Well, from the 90s to 2000s, they both kind of got their lunch handed to them because I mean, IBM was in the red for God, over a decade now, right? The global services was the only thing making a profit. Everything else was basically in the red. And it was only after they purchased Red Hat that they started to kind of come back. So in my mind, obviously I'm biased because I love open source, is that boogeyman argument doesn't really exist because people just want to be able to do things that's useful to themselves. I mean,
So
yeah, sure, they're bad people, but to me,
yeah.
the bad people are less than 1%.
So maybe the question is, why do you think China open sourced this?
I think because that's this. that's the best strategy for competing against these closed models.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as when Linus Torvald open sourced Linux, and like it was at first it was a hobby thing. I remember going to computer labs and we're like, this is new OS called Linux by this kid in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
People feel like, oh, that's not going to do anything. Microsoft's like, oh, don't use open source. Like, you don't know what's going to go happen. Well, now today, Azure is built on Linux. Like, they're making billions every quarter on Linux, and actually, they open source their whole entire stack. So, could it be bad? Well, yes, it could, but it also means that like now businesses are more willing to trust Microsoft because they can look at the source code, they can report bugs, they
Yeah.
can. And when I find bugs in Azure, I can go look, I can report the bug and say, here's the fix.
Yeah.
So it actually saves them time.
Yeah. It's a huge crowdsourcing advantage. And well, this is cool. I do encourage everyone to watch this 10-minute video. It's got a lot in it and opens up a lot of questions, right? And just topics I think they're very fascinating in this space. So Peter, thanks for the time. This is good. Make sure to follow us, like, subscribe. We're also on Spotify, and we will see you next time.